Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the very best counters to every single brawler in the game currently. So all 50 brawlers, figuring out what the best counter is to them. Obviously, there's a bunch of different like scenarios where obviously the interactions can change, but on paper, these are going to be the best counters for those brawlers. So before we get into today's video, make sure you're using a creator code in the shop. Mine would be greatly appreciated. And without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So before we jump into it, today's video is sponsored by an epic new game called Knight's Edge. So as a tribe are doing a crazy collaboration with Knight's Edge, which you guys can get involved with. If you've been keeping up with Tribe on social media, you would have noticed by now that the famous Tribe axes have been missing for some time now, and they were in fact stolen by an in-game boss. So in Knight's Edge, there are 7 creative themed maps, including maps from Molt, Nat, Ben, Lex, Karos, Chief Pat, and OJ, and my personal favorite has to be Chief Pat's Rocketeerium. If a Chief is firing those rockets, it's going to be so easy to complete that level. So once you've completed all of the levels, there'll be a big boss at the end, and once you defeat the big boss, you would have reclaimed the famous Tribe axes, and you would have earned yourself an amazing Tribe skin in-game. There's also the chance for players to earn the All Together award, which will reward you with a unique Tribe emote in-game. You can do this by entering all 7 unique creator codes in-game. So make sure you guys are downloading the game. The link is in the description below. You don't want to miss out on all of these cool things happening with Knight's Edge. And I just want to say again, a huge thank you to Knight's Edge for sponsoring today's video. And without further ado, let's jump into today's video. Alright guys, so as always for these type of videos, going to be starting off with a starter brawler and working our way up into the chromatic rarity. So starting off with a starter brawler, Shelly. I feel like any brawler in the game counters Shelly really, but definitely the hardest matchup for me would have to be Anita, and especially if Anita gets the better. Shelly's just got such a slow reload speed. Anita should just easily be able to win that matchup. Okay, so next up we have Anita. So for me, if you're looking to counter Anita down the lane, I feel like Spike would be the best option for sure. Once you build up your super with Spike and obviously corner Anita off with that super, you should just be able to just destroy Anita. Anita lacks a lot of range, and Spike, if played correctly, will absolutely destroy Anita on lane. Okay, so next up we have Colt. So most brawlers will beat Colt just automatically on lane anyways, but on the maps that Colt are good on, I feel like Piper is the best counter to Colt. The main reason for this, but Piper can just easily outrange a Colt and can easily just tap him once and just gadget him. So Piper's probably going to be the best counter on those long range maps. Okay, so next up we have Bull. So Bull is really bad against Ems if you don't have a Stomper gadget, but just in general, like Ems' gadget can just push Bull away, and it just be really frustrating to try and get close to Ems, especially if you don't have that super. So Ems down that lane, it probably is the best counter to Bull. Okay, so next up we have Jessie. So Jessie can easily be counterable when she doesn't have her turret. So literally any brawler in the game should really be able to beat her without that turret. But with turret, I feel like the 4 brawlers probably are the best counters to her. Barley in particular should just be able to just shred her turret and then just basically make her useless, because Jessie without a turret is really bad. So I'm looking at those 4 brawlers to counter Jessie. Okay, so next up we have Brook. Brock really strong in the meta at the moment, especially on those longer range maps. So on the more longer range maps, the best counters for Brock more than likely the likes of Piper and Sprout. Piper's just really good against Brock because Brock's shots are normally hard to hit without his gadget, whilst Piper is a lot easier to hit and should be able to win in those 1v1 interactions. I also had Buzz, especially if you're just hiding behind a wall. He can just counter Brock really easily once you get that stun off on him. So those are going to be the best counters for Brock. So next up we have Dynamite. I feel like this is a really easy one to understand the counters to him. Basically any sort of aggro counters Dynamite, but the 2 in particular that just completely wreck Dynamite in a 1v1 going to be Mortis and Edgar. I just feel like literally anyone, so like me, the worst Mortis in the world, can normally counter a Dynamite. It's just so hard to really do anything against them unless you get like a lucky stun or like a good super on them. You're just going to get completely wrecked by Mortis and Edgar. So next up we have Bo. So Bo, for me, I feel like every other mid inside of the game is better than Bo. So it's kind of hard to say like what completely counters him, but as I said, like Jean, Bell, Byron, all these different mid brawlers should just be able to wreck Bo easily. Okay, so next up we have Tick. So Tick can really struggle against those aggressive brawlers. He does have his super and his gadget to knock those back, so that's, I don't think, the biggest hard counter. I think for me the biggest hard counter if played correctly is a Sprout. A Sprout versus Tick 1v1. I feel like Sprout should just easily be able to win that every single time, especially on certain maps as well. So either you got to go like a really aggressive combo, or Sprout could be good enough to take down that tick. So next up we have 8-Bit, and 8-Bit's biggest counter for me is always Belle. So Belle, one of the strongest brawlers in the meta. Obviously she's going to counter a lot of different brawlers, but I just think the bouncing mechanic just really does hard counter 8-Bit, especially if you've got that turret behind you. It's just going to be so annoying. You can't really go close to your turret. You've got to make sure you're staying away from it, and for the majority of the part I don't really want to go 8-Bit in competitive because I know Belle is just going to absolutely destroy me. So next up we have Ems, and I feel like Ems is a really easy brawler to counter with Mortis. So Mortis is going to absolutely destroy Ems. Everyone probably knows this already. As soon as those Ems gadgets goes, Mortis is just going to go to absolute town on an Ems. Nothing Ems can do without that gadget. So now moving on to Stu, I feel like there's 3 clear brawlers that easily counter him, especially for example in Power League. Someone picks a Stu, you can pick one of these 3 brawlers and you should be having a good time against him. So you got the likes of Tara, Ruffs and Spike. All 3 of those brawlers gadgets counter Stu, mainly because you have to waste ammo to destroy them, and then the enemy can obviously capitalize on that and take down the Stu. So next up we have El Primo. So El Primo in his former glory, there wasn't really any counters to Primo because of how strong he was in the meta, but right now he's not the best, and I feel like Colette can easily counter him, especially if you're using the push it style power. You can easily just 2-tap a Primo and super him and he'll be dead. Okay, so next up we have Barley. So his biggest hard counter has to be Edgar for me. So 2 maps that are the greatest example of this are Pit Stop and Hot Potato. So normally Barley is played a lot there, but now you're seeing a lot of Edgar come into the meta just because Edgar just completely wrecks Barley in that 1v1 interaction. So next up we have Poco. I feel like most brawlers have a good matchup in 1v1 scenarios versus a Poco, but I feel like for me the really aggressive brawlers are going to be the ones that counter Poco the most. So that's going to be the likes of Mortis and Buzz. It's so annoying when there's a Mortis literally on top of you and no way you can actually kill him. Even if you cycle a bunch of supers, you just know that Mortis is just going to wreck you. So next up we have Rosa. So I feel like the biggest hard counter to a Rosa has to be an Ems for me. So the ways you can kind of counteract this as a Rosa is by standing close to walls, so the knockback isn't as effective. But I think long term, once Ems gets that super and slows you down and keeps its distance, Ems should just be able to absolutely wreck you in that 1v1. So next up we have Rico. So the same example as Barley. So maps like Pit Stop and Hot Potato, Edgar is brought out on that map because Edgar just completely wrecks Rico in that 1v1 situation. So obviously you can chip away an Edgar behind walls, but I feel like as soon as Edgar gets in distance of a Rico, there's just no way you're going to be able to kill Edgar in that scenario. So next up we have Daryl. So I feel like most brawlers will have a good matchup against Daryl, but I feel like the biggest hard counter for me has to be El Primo. Once El Primo gets that first super, I just feel like there's just no way Daryl can really take him down unless you get like a pinch going or you get like a lucky super and get that knockback. I feel like Primo just absolutely destroys him in that 1v1. So next up we have Penny. So Penny for me is just absolutely terrible against those aggro brawlers. So again, Mortis is an amazing hard counter to Penny. Buzz, all these different assassin brawlers are just going to wreck Penny. She's got such a slow reload speed. Penny's only really good against the control brawlers and the squishy brawlers. So yeah, for me, Buzz and Mortis are just going to absolutely wreck Penny. Okay, so next up we have Carl. So Carl, one of the worst brawlers in the game right now. So again, most brawlers are going to be countering Carl, but I just feel like whenever Carl is meta, you see a lot of BB come into play. So I can think of a time like in Siege, for example, BB just wrecks Carl in that 1v1 mainly because of the gadget and just the ability to push Carl into a wall and just completely wreck him. Next up we have the worst brawler in the game, Jackie. So Jackie, I feel like pretty much every single brawler counters Jackie in 3v3 scenarios. Jackie never normally gets into range of even her hard counters, so I feel like probably all 50 brawlers have a good matchup against Jackie, but I feel like the hardest counter probably is an El Primo. Even with the counter crusher style power, Primo should just be able to wreck a Jackie. Okay, so next up we have Piper, and I feel like on the longer range maps, Max is the hardest counter to a Piper, and the main reason for this is because of Max's dashes and Max's supers. So for the majority of the part when I'm going like a longer range map, for example like Backyard Bowl, back in the old meta, like people would just run Max everywhere and it was just unplayable to play Piper. So for me it's either like the assassin brawlers, but in general I feel like Max probably is the biggest counter. Okay, so next up we have Pam's hardest counters, which for me has to be either Colette or a Belle. So right now Belle is just amazing everywhere, so normally Pam has kind of just gone down in the meta just because of how strong Belle is of a counter to her, but in general probably Colette is the the biggest counter because Pam is a really beefy character, and of course Colette's just going to easily feed super from her, and with the push it style power should just be able to wreck Pam in those 1v1 scenarios. Okay, so next up we have Frank, another fairly simple one. Primo just absolutely destroys Frank in that 1v1 scenario, especially with the gadget and the Primo supers. Frank just gets knocked back way too easily and gets destroyed in that 1v1. Okay, so next up we have BB's hardest counter, which is El Primo again. So El Primo is definitely a brawler which I would see if I'm playing a BB, and I'll be like, there's just no way I'm killing this brawler, especially with Primo's gadgets. Again, you can just keep throwing BB. BB's not going to be able to do anything. Primo's supers as well. It's going to be such an easy kill for that El Primo. Okay, so next up we have B. So in that mid interaction, I feel like the biggest counter by far to a B, it has to be Sprout. So Sprout, especially on a map like Sneaky Fields, as you can see in the gameplay, like whenever Sprout is brought out against me, I just basically just quit the app. Sprout just easily wrecks B, 3 taps B behind walls as well, and B really has no counterpart to it, like a wall break or just like a super that can actually kill Sprout behind a wall or something like that. Yeah, B just gets wrecked by Sprout. Okay, so next up we have Nanny. So on those longer range maps, which Nanny thrives on, I feel like the biggest hard counter for me has to be Max. So Max with his speed, the ability to dash, and just a quick movement makes it really hard for Nanny to hit shots. Nanny is just really hard to hit shots with anyway, and Max just makes that even more harder. Okay, so next up we have Edgar. So a fairly simple one for me has to be Surge. So whenever I'm having trouble against an Edgar or I'm trying to predict an Edgar, Surge is by far the best counter for this. So for Surge, the main reason why he's such a good counter is because of the TPs. When Edgar jumps in, you can TP away. You've also got his super, which you can use to obviously push Edgar back and get some damage onto Edgar as well. So you can either just free tap an Edgar straight up, or you can shoot him twice and super an Edgar, and it's just going to be over for them. So Surge completely wrecks Edgar in those 1v1s. Okay, so next up we have Griff. So most brawlers do beat Griff in those 1v1 interactions, except for like the really aggro ones, especially with his super. But for me, I feel like Amber probably is the best counter to a Griff. The main reason for it is Griff's main attack is like really slow and really hard to hit consistently, and Amber with that gadget can speed up and just take down a Griff easily. Okay, so next up we're looking at Mortis' hardest counter. For me, it has to be a Bull, mainly for the reason that Bull can two-shot a Mortis, I believe, or close, but Bull just overall like a really hard kill. I would never really go and contest a Bull if I was Mortis unless I had super, but in general, the brawlers that counter Mortis normally like the knockback brawlers or brawlers that have like a game-changing super. So for example, like a Tara. So next up we're looking at Tara's hardest counters, which for me has to be Amber and Sandy's. So for example, on a lane like Undermine, if I'm facing off against a Tara, I'll normally look to pick like a Sandy or an Amber. The main reason for this is because they can shoot through her Tara pets. You don't really want to go a brawler that struggles against pets, you know, like a Stu. You want someone who can shoot through them. So Sandy and Amber both have that ability and normally win that matchup down the lane. Okay, so next up on the list we have Jean. So Jean has a couple of counters. The brawlers that I think of in general that counter Jean the hardest are brawlers that are going to waste his ammo a lot. So I've got like Mr. P and Ruffs as the biggest counters, and Tara as well. So for Ruffs and Tara, it's mainly because of the gadget. You can't really pull those brawlers because you're going to be pulling like a sandbag or a Tara pet, but also Mr. P as well. If the Mr. P is using like revolving door or just has his super in general, Jean has a really slow reload speed. So anything that has like a spawner in it is going to be countering Jean. Okay, so next up we have Max, a fairly simple one to counter. For me, it has to be Crow. Crow is such a huge hard counter to Max. Even when Max was like one of the best brawlers inside of a game, Crow is pretty much used everywhere because it's the hardest counter. The main reason for it is just because Max is easy to hit with Crow's mechanic and their gadget as well. You're going to be slowing Max down. Obviously, with Max supers, it's going to be really fast, just going to be really hard to counter, and that slow is going to be punishing towards Max. So next up, we have Mr. P, another easy brawler to counter for me. Just any type of aggro should just be able to wreck Mr. P in those 1v1 scenarios, just especially like a Mortis. There's just nothing Mr. P can really do to push back the Mortis or really do a lot of damage up close. So next up, we have Sprout, really easy brawler to counter for me. It has to just be any sort of aggressive brawler. Obviously, there's ways to work around countering those aggro brawlers with your walls, trying to push them away from you. But in general, I feel like BB is the hardest counter, mainly because of her shield star power and gadget. I think that's the most frustrating matchup for me, either like a high HP brawler or just a BB just constantly healing it up. You think you're getting a low, but she's just healing in your face. Okay, so next up we have Byron. So I feel like Byron, for me, the biggest hard counter has to be something like a Sprout. So aggro sometimes can be annoying for Byron to deal with, like a Mortis or like an Eggo if you don't have the splash, but you can counter him with the splash. But for me, Sprout is going to be a good counter to Byron because he can easily free tap him. So once those gadgets are gone, Sprout can easily take down a Byron. Okay, so next up, as the biggest hard counter to Squeak, we have a Leon. So any sort of aggro should just be able to deal with Squeak effectively because of how slow his reload speed is. For me, Leon is just so toxic against the Squeak, especially with how much damage a Leon can do up close. Squeak just doesn't have the ability to do a lot of damage back to him and like push him back or just do any sort of damage that can counteract that. Okay, so now moving on to the legendary brawlers. First off, starting off with a Spike. So again, maps like Backyard Bowl or just maps like Minecraft Madness as well, when facing off against a Sprout lane, it's near enough an impossible matchup to face off against. The gadget's going to help you a little bit to tank a few shots, but Sprout free taps a Spike and should just be able to completely wreck him down that lane. Okay, so next up we have Crow. So for me, the biggest hard counter for a Crow has to be a Spike. And the main reason for this is because of his gadget. What Spike can easily do is just place down that gadget, hide behind it, let it tank for him, let it heal up for him, and Spike should just be able to win that matchup fairly easily. Another good counter is a Piper, mainly because he gets 2-tapped by the Piper, but yeah, for me, Spike is going to be that brawler that counters him. Okay, so next up, we have Leon's hardest counters. So for me, I feel like Crow has to be the hardest counter just because of his poison mechanic. You can obviously see where Leon is in the gadget or just in the super as well. So Crow's really good down the lane against that Leon, and also brawlers that can take down his gadget behind the wall pretty easily, so like a Mr. P. So next up, we have Sandy, and his biggest hard counter for me has to be BB. The main reason for this is because of the BB shield, and also the gadget just allows BB to push up close to a Sandy, and then once BB gets into striking distance, it's just a really quick, easy kill, and any sort of aggro really deals with Sandy well. Okay guys, so finally moving on to the final legendary brawler, we have Amber. So Amber's biggest hard counter has to be Crow. Again, for me, especially like on a map like Undermine, for example, even like a long range map like Backyard Bowl, the Crow interaction is just so easy. Crow is just really easy to hit shots against an Amber, and you can just slow her down, especially when you get the Crow jump as well. Amber doesn't really do a lot of quick damage, so that Crow jump getting up close to an Amber is just going to absolutely destroy her. Okay, so now moving on to the chromatic brawlers, starting off with a Gale. Gale pretty much loses lane against every single brawler in the game, other than really the aggressive brawlers, so I feel like every brawler has an easy matchup against him. I picked Amber as probably the hardest counter. It can be pretty much any solid lane like a Sandy, Spike, or anything like that. He's just never really going to win his 1v1 matchup. So next up with the chromatic brawlers, we have Surge. So Surge, I just feel like he's got the same kind of mechanics as a Stu. So the brawlers that are going to counter Stu are going to be countering Surge. So the likes of Ruffs, Tara, and Spike, those are going to be the three biggest hard counters for Surge. Fairly simple to counter. Okay, so next up we have Colette's biggest hard counter. For me, it has to really be any lane brawler that isn't a tank. So Spike is going to probably be the best hard counter to Colette, mainly because she has to waste free ammo to take down that gadget, and just also it's going to be really hard to kill a Spike, especially just with Colette's mechanics. She's only really built to deal with those tanks. So next up we have Lou. So Lou, another brawler that is really anti-tank, so anything that's kind of lower HP or just any really lane brawler in particular. I've gone for a Surge because you can free tap a Lou, and I'm thinking of maps like Ring of Fire. Whenever I used to face off against like a Surge lane, it just used to be such a free kill for the Surge. He could just TP in, get that free taps, and kill the Lou. So basically any lane brawler is going to be having a good matchup against Lou. So next up we have Ruffs. So the brawlers I'm thinking in general that counter Ruffs the hardest are going to be the likes of Amber and Penny. The main reason for this is because they can take down those sandbags really easily. So Amber's probably going to be the hardest counter just because she can press that gadget and just burst down Ruffs really quickly. Penny's going to be really good because Penny can free tap Ruffs and also pierce through the sandbags. And then there's also a couple of other brawlers that I think of that really hard counter him, the likes of Barley and Sprout, because they can free tap him and Barley can easily take down his sandbags with one shot. Okay guys, so now moving into probably the best brawler inside of the game right now, Belle. Obviously, if she's one of the best brawlers in the game, she's not going to have many hard counters, and for me, I could only really think of a couple of brawlers which I know for sure do hard counter. But as a Belle, you don't really want to be facing off against a Piper because for the most part Piper can just get one tap and gadget the Belle, but still you can have an okay matchup against that Piper as a Belle. Another brawler is Sprout. Sprout can free tap a Belle, so obviously if you get behind the walls, you can destroy a bell with a Sprout. So now moving on to another top 5 brawler in the meta, we have Buzz. So Buzz, I kind of think is similar with the counters that Edgar has. So for me, Surge is going to be by far the biggest hard counter to a Buzz. The main reason for this is because Surge can 4-tap a Buzz, and just overall the mechanics on Surge just leads to just countering Buzz so easily. So you've got the TPs with Surge, you can TP away from the grapple. You've also got his super as well, and for the most part, if I'm like one shot from my super, or obviously got my super, I'll be TPing on a Buzz, TP, use my super, that's gonna literally take one less shot to take him down. So it's either like 3 shots and a super, or 4 shots to counteract that Buzz. Alright guys, so finally moving on to the final brawler on the list. So we have Ash, who's probably the best brawler inside of the game right now, with a healer or not. So I think there's only 3 hard counters to an Ash, and even at that, Ash can still beat the matchup, especially if there's a healer behind him. But I think B is the strongest counter to Ash, mainly because of her slow mechanics. She's got the gadget and also her super as well. The constant 3k shots, B's going to be having a good time against Ash. The other 2 brawlers which counter Ash a little bit are Crow because of the anti-healing and the slows, and also Bella as well because you can mark an Ash. But yeah, for me, B has to be the hardest counter. Okay guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed this one. It took a long time to make this one, so I appreciate you guys. If you have not subscribed, to subscribe already, to like the video, and let me know down in the comment section below what improvements you want to see to these type of videos, whether you want to see more in the future. Of course, I want to dive into it a little bit more. It's really hard just in like 20 seconds to talk about every brawler and like the counters and whatever else. So let me know how you'd want me to kind of approach this in future series on the channel. So yeah, that's going to be it in today's video, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.